Good evening, everyone. Uh, I was an engineering student in 1960, the only engineering student at Manhattan College interested in politics. I've been involved in so many issues you wouldn't believe it. National security, economics, taxes, moral issues. But this issue, in my judgment of school choice, is the major issue for 2016 about which there is the greatest degree of misunderstanding by two large groups. And that's the purpose, that's the reason why I think this is the key issue for 2016, because of the enormity of the misunderstanding. School choice involves things like education savings accounts, scholarships, tuition tax credits, vouchers. Certain of these are not permitted in New York because of something that most of you probably never heard of, the Blaine Amendment. 37 states have a Blaine Amendment, B-L-A-I-N-E, which has a history in anti-Catholicism. It was adopted back in the 1870s or so by all these states that were upset at the Catholic schools that were forming in the 19th century. No one even talks about it anymore. Liberals and conservatives have no disagreement on this. They all acknowledge the anti-Catholic history of the Blaine Amendments. There's now a case that's been filed with the Supreme Court, if they take it, that might repeal the Colorado Blaine Amendment, in which case all the states' Blaine Amendments will go. Blaine Amendments prohibit aid to any religious school directly or indirectly, which means you can't provide tuition tax credits or vouchers or education savings accounts. Education savings accounts, by the way, differ from vouchers in that the government gives every parent a certain amount of money that they put into an account, and they can use that money for tuition at a private school, and then to motivate the private schools to keep their costs down, any money left over, that parent can use for that child's college education. And the amount that the government gives to those parents is always far less than the amount spent at the local public school. So it's a win-win for taxpayers and for parents. I'm not going to get into all the specifics of those, but what I want to go over are some key advantages. Those who I want to go into who opposes this, because I'm flabbergasted when I talk to people at how unaware they are as who's opposing this. And also, I want to get into where Hispanic and African American and low-income white voters, who they think is opposing it. There's a gross degree of misunderstanding on this. The advantages: educational quality. Competition in education obviously is going to improve the quality of education. It's a no-brainer. What happened in Milwaukee, they were the first state, the first city in Wisconsin to try vouchers back in 1990. A white Republican conservative governor, Tommy Thompson, got together with an African-American liberal Democrat assemblywoman named Polly Williams, liberal conservative Republican Democrat, got together and they put through the first voucher system in the United States. It was opposed by the mayor of Milwaukee, John Norquist. They did it. A lot of African-American kids in Milwaukee then switched to private religious schools, mostly Catholic schools. And after 3 or 4 years, and they took the tests, the standardized tests, they found out these kids were doing better than the kids who didn't leave the public schools. So these private religious schools were doing better at much lower cost than the public schools. Then, 2 years after that, they started seeing the public schools improve. That was about 6 years after the program was started, because of the competition. And the public schools were now motivated to improve the quality of education, or they're going to lose customers, students. So everyone won. The taxpayers won because the cost went down, and these poor families and middle-income families won because their kids got a better education. Now the other area, and there's a tremendous degree of ignorance. This is a big problem. I'm going to get into that with who's opposing this. But taxpayers went in a huge way. And there was a study done, very few people are aware of it. It was done in 1991 for the New York State Senate by Ron Lauder of Estee Lauder. He was asked by the New York State Senate to look at ways to save New York State taxpayers from the rising costs that we were facing in New York back in the early 90s. He looked at roadways and bridges and selling different buildings. He looked at everything. He printed his results in the New York Times and all the newspapers, November 24th, 1991. I have a copy here if anyone ever needs it. It's a full page he took out in the New York Times. and all the other newspapers with the findings that he did for the New York State Senate. The one area that swamped everything else combined, add everything else combined, this was more than double that, was school choice. School choice, he found back in 1991, would save New York taxpayers $4 billion, with a B, dollars per year. Today that would be somewhere over $8 billion, probably $10 billion per year, with parental choice in education. November 24th, 1991, New York Times, you want to check it. The final area, it's an area I don't get into that often, is the values, the moral values. When I went to Catholic grammar school in the 50s, and public schools then were really fine schools. I don't think there were that many moral issues, but today they get into a lot of moral issues that are very controversial, and which a lot of parents would have problems with. Some parents want their kids to get a condom when they want it. Other parents don't want that. Some kids are given a contraceptive, and parents like it. Other parents don't like that. They're teaching, there's certain kind of clubs that are formed that some parents like, other parents don't. They're getting into a lot of controversial areas, and I don't want to criticize parents who think other than the way I think, but that should be up to the parent to decide what kind of values he or she wants for their children. So values, the cost to the taxpayer, and the quality of education. By the way, anytime you're talking school choice, the only school that would qualify for a voucher, scholarship, education savings account, tax credit, would be a school that's accredited by the state. And what that means is it can't just be some dumpy little school that teaches anything they want. They've got to teach what the state requires in any particular state. Math, English, history, science, art, music. They've got to meet certain requirements to be accredited. All the Jewish, Christian, Catholic schools in New York State are accredited by the state. They're examined. Now, who opposes school choice? This is amazing. I've asked about, in the past 6 months, maybe 50 people this question. And because I was wondering if people knew. And 95% of the people do not know who's opposing school choice. It blows my, that's right. I couldn't believe it. They didn't know. I had smart high school kids asking. I had intelligent people. These are very intelligent people. Most, even teachers, they did not know who was opposing school choice. It's the public school teacher unions. They're 90% of the opposition to school choice. Why? Because they don't want any competition. They want to keep their educational monopoly. Sometimes I use the term, I call it an unnatural monopoly. And some professor at Hofstra, I think, wrote a letter in our local paper saying, what the heck is Mr. Russo talking? What's an unnatural monopoly? What's a natural? He was wondering, a natural monopoly. There are natural monopolies. Delivery of water, for example, is a natural monopoly. You don't want double sets of pipes going to your house. Education is not a natural monopoly. It's an unnatural monopoly. I worked at AT&T, and we were the largest company in the world. And I remember when my boss, I was division manager, my boss, Jim Barr, asked me, this is when the Department of Justice was trying to break up the Bell system in the late 70s. Frank, see if you can come up with some studies to show why we don't need competition in telecommunications. And I looked at him, and I knew he was an honest guy. I spent 2 weeks looking for a lot of economic study. I went back to them. They knew they'd get a straight answer from me. I said, Jim, in all honesty, I looked at a lot of studies. The customer is going to win. The consumer is going to win. We're not going to win at AT&T with the biggest company in the world. We had 1 million employees. We're not going to win, but the customer is going to win. We're not going to lie. He laughed. He knew it. And of course, they broke up the Bell system then in 1982. They announced it, and they did it in 1984. They broke it up into 8 companies. Competition is good for education. It's a no-brainer. There are also a small group of anti-religious bigots who don't like the idea or the concept of God. They get annoyed at it. It's a diminishing number. It's not a big part of the problem. The big problem are the teacher unions. They're 90%, 95% of the opposition. Now, who supports it? Well, there's a greater degree of support for school choice among minority parents. Hispanic and African American parents, like 80 to 90% want school choice. When they explain what it is, they want it. Whites are more like 50-50. Especially like wealthy whites, they're going to move to a nice area, get what they feel are good schools. But for low-income whites, for minority groups, they want this more than the other folks. So it's especially desirable by low-income whites, blacks, Hispanics, and middle-income people as well. Why? Because they can't afford to pay the tuition at a Catholic, Protestant, or Jewish school, even though the tuition and the cost is less than half the cost of the public school. But they can't afford to pay it because they're paying taxes to pay for the public schools. Taxpayers do not understand that they're going to save an enormous amount of money. It's another thing. Most taxpayers are saying, well, if we have to pay for, first of all, their image of private schools is like fancy private schools, Sidwell's Academy, where Obama sent his kids $60,000, or Buckley schools. You know, there's a lot of private schools are very, very expensive, but 3/4 of private schools are religious schools doing the job at less than half the cost of our public schools. And that's after I take into account special needs costs. I take that out, that's separate. I take out transportation and books because the state pays private schools and public schools for transportation and books. So taxpayers don't understand the enormity of the savings. $4 billion back 25 years ago, $8 to $10 billion in savings today. Our budget's about $145 billion, state budget. This is an enormous amount of money that would be saved. And parents concerned about values would win. They support it. Who's stopping it again? Now, why? I guess when I asked too, it's the Democrats who are stopping it. This bill, I've been working on this for probably 30 years now, 20 to 30 years. It's passed the New York State Senate in the past 5 years 4 times. They just passed it the 4th time in January, last month, for the 4th time, the New York State Senate, overwhelmingly, with Democrat senators supporting it. Cuomo has put it in his budget. He's supporting it. It's now, the Democrats in the Assembly will not allow a vote. They've never allowed a vote in 20 years. They won't allow a vote. Shelley Silver stopped it, even though I think he may have had sympathies because he had a lot of Orthodox Jewish people were in his Assembly district, but he would not allow a vote. Carl Hastie, the new Democratic Assembly leader from the Bronx, was a co-sponsor of 2551, A2551. He was a co-sponsor. He becomes leader of the Assembly when Silver gets convicted. Now he won't allow a vote. My Assemblywoman, Michelle Schimmel, was leader of the Democratic Conference. She was a co-sponsor. When it came down to it and the unions put the pressure on this past June of 2015, she backed off, wouldn't allow a vote. So it's the Democrats who are stopping it, and the minority voters and the Hispanic, the African-American Hispanic voters who vote 90% Democratic have no idea it's the Democrats stopping it. How do I know that? I went to Bishop Loughlin Memorial High School. It was 95% white back then, now it's 95% minority. I get calls, I make contributions from black women. They're calling me. And I've asked them for 5 years now, why don't you get your Democratic Assemblymen to support this tuition? And it took me a long time to figure out, to judge what their expression was. They thought I was crazy or I was lying. They had no idea, they wouldn't believe me. They thought I was lying to them or crazy. They could not believe that the Democratic Assembly people would not support that bill, which in other words, it's to help the poor, which is the party that supposedly wants to help the poor. Democrats have that image. No, it's the Republicans that are supporting it. Republicans and Democrats both want to help the poor in different ways and different degrees, and who is the poor, how much help do you provide. But on this issue, it's a no-brainer. It's an enormous impact for taxpayers and to help the poor, enormous ways, and yet it's the Democrats siding with the unions, stopping the bill, and the Republicans who want to help the poor and the taxpayer. The poor and the taxpayer win with this bill. It's another point. Every way I could think of helping the poor, housing subsidies, food stamps, Medicaid, you have to raise taxes to help the poor that way. With school choice, you help them educationally, and you help the taxpayer at the same time. It's the only way I know of to do it, where you help the poor and the taxpayer. What I've wondered is why the Republicans are not talking about this issue. That's what I'd like to see the Republicans promote this issue, push it, discuss it. And you can't do it in 1 or 2 months, because if you put ads on TV, the minority voters are not going to believe it. I know that now. I can see that. They're going to think this is a lie. Until they talk to their local minister or their neighbors and their friends and to verify, it's going to take 3 or 4 months of ads to convince the people, low-income whites in different areas. They're not going to believe it, that it's the Democrats holding this up. I just wanted to mention, too, a couple of final points. The word choice. I mean, people like choice. That's connected to freedom. It's interesting how liberals and conservatives, though, view the word choice. Liberals and Democrats favor choice when it comes to the right of a woman to kill her unborn child. But they oppose the right of that same mother to pick a school for their child. So they're for choice to kill the baby. They're against choice for the mother to pick a school for her child. Conservatives and Republicans, not all, large majorities, are the opposite. They oppose the right of a woman to kill her unborn child. They support the right of a woman to pick a school for her child. By the way, the United States is one of the, educationally on standardized tests, we come out pretty poorly compared to other Western nations, if you don't know that. A lot of people are surprised at that. We come out 15th, 20th. We're not doing that well. One of the poorest industrialized nations in the world, educationally speaking. And New York State, in spite of the fact we are number one in spending, $21,000 per pupil average, we are number one, way ahead of everybody else. We come out about 25th or 30th of the 50 states in DC. DC is at the bottom and they're one of the high spenders too. But we come out like 25th or 30th every time on the NAEP, National Assessment of Educational Progress. So it's not money, it's other things that have to do with it. New York State, so New York, let's see. I mentioned the Blaine Amendment. There is a case now brought by Colorado. I forget the name of the county, Douglas County, I think, that has vouchers in Colorado. It was challenged by the teachers union. It was declared unconstitutional, violative of the Blaine Amendment of the state of Colorado. And now 3 solid groups and a Hispanic group, 3 solid conservative legal groups are filing an appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court to declare the Blaine Amendment unconstitutional. If it's heard, we don't know how it's going to go by the 9 justices, but if it's overturned, the Colorado Blaine Amendment is overturned, then all the states will lose their anti-Catholic, bigoted Blaine Amendments, which would be a wonderful thing. Again, I'm ending it now. This is the only way I know of to help the poor and the taxpayer. We've got to educate the voters, the poor voters, especially that it's the Democrats holding this up. We've got to start contacting our assembly person and letting them know that this is a major issue of concern to us, and it's the one way people who are paying high property taxes, as we are in Long Island and Westchester and Putnam and Rockland counties. This is the best way to not only stop the increases, we'll lower the school taxes. Everyone wins, taxpayers and all students. Thank you very much, and I this is available over at the desk over there, and the AFA newsletter, which talks about school choice in it. It's free. Anyone who wants it, just fill in the coupon and mail it in. There's no fee for it. We'll be happy to put you on our mailing list, okay? Thank you.